Welcome to The Learning Curve, your industry podcast on all things on enterprise learning.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of The Learning Curve with me, Kenny. Today we have another very, very exciting topic for you, and that's going to be the topic of onboarding new talent from university to industry. So it's going to be a first for me because not only do I have one guest, but I have two guests. The first guest, it will be Professor Dr. Peter Konhäusner. Okay, I tried to switch somewhere between German and English on that. It should be Konhäusner. So since I can't speak a little German, I might as well throw that in there. And the second is Jeffery Lovejoy, talent acquisition lead at GotPhoto and co-founder of Germany Early, one second, Careers Group. Okay. And both of you are in Berlin, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So let's get this show started. We have, like I said, you two as individuals, each representing a part of the career path when basically a young individual comes into his career being. And we're going to start with that then with Peter. Excuse me. So first of all, thank you for joining us on this podcast, or joining me on this podcast. Can you start by telling us about your role at Gisma and how you help students transition from academia to the working world?
Thank you, Kenny, for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. And it's wonderful to see you again, Jeff.
Yes.
Kenny, to start off with such a question, right? It's always difficult because if you ask a professor like this, then it can happen that I'm talking now a monologue for an hour or something like this. I try to not do that. But okay, so my role is Professor for Digital Entrepreneurship at Gisma University of Applied Sciences with campuses in Potsdam and in Berlin. And I'm also the Vice President for Partnerships and Collaborations. And if you ask me, in my role, I have a lot to do with career development of our students, basically, because all the partnerships, not only the corporate ones, but also the academic ones, we are engaging in with the career development focus for our students in mind, right? To make it really easy for them to make the next career step if they have worked before, or to enter the market in Germany if they're coming from abroad, or to land their first job. So, I think we'll go into some details further down the line, but two of the big initiatives, or two big tools we are using is, first of all, we have a career center, which is dedicated for career development for our students, also helping on a one-to-one basis. So they are doing CV checks, they are doing, partner events, etc. And on the other side, we have something called Skill Sprint Week, which is a week in every quarter dedicated to career and skill development. And we see a skill development, also networking, for example. We see there also soft skills like presenting, but also knowledge acquisition. Yeah.
Okay, that's going to be exciting then. Quick question there on that part. What percentage of your students, this might be, you might not have the figure in your head, are international students?
So we call ourselves the BizTech University. So we are combining business and technology. And based on that, we are calling us the most international, or probably most international German university, to be honest. Because we have, it's a little bit of a bold statement, but we have like 97% international students with us.
Excuse me, did you say 97?
Yes, exactly. So,
wow.
But this also, Kenny, this also involves all staff and faculty, actually, right? So there are not many German speakers at all. All the programs, everything is in English, and you have this nice diversity, which is really enriching. So for us, it's always, BizTech University, which is maybe, you have some BizTech universities worldwide, but we really like this diverse approach, and basically all this intercultural communication coming in, and also all the good things and the bad things about diversity you have also at Gisma, right? So we have discussions about the war in Ukraine. We have discussions about Gaza, right? Thankfully, we don't have any protests, etc. But basically, all that in a microcosmos, together with the wonderful approach that you see that often education and communication helps to solve issues and facilitate relationships also across borders.
Okay, not even 5 minutes into the podcast, and I'm already shell-shocked. I absolutely did not. When I asked you the question about the percentage, 97% isn't a figure that I would have come back with by the best of it. Maybe I should have done more dedicated research. Is that obviously available somewhere by you on the website, or?
It is. Also, we have some kind of statistic and data block, right? There you see also that we have now over 2,000 students, that we are basically awarding degrees for more than 4 years now. So rather young university, but rather ambitious. So you see all our programs, and you see also a snapshot about the demographic of our students. Yes.
Fantastic. Okay. Wow. Okay. And this is going to be really interesting. Because then it even more so applies to basically our listening audience, which is the international audience, seeing that you have such a nice mix of people from different nationalities, countries, and so forth and so on. Okay, so let's take a look at the question of curriculum and career readiness. In your experience, how has the curriculum evolved to match industry demands? What impact has digitalization had in helping meet industry demands? And I'm going to wrap it up with a third part of the question, and that is, what skills do you believe are essential for students entering today's job market?
There are 3 questions which are huge, right? So,
but remember, you're going to have to answer them in as short a manner as possible.
So basically, we started our university in the beginning of Corona, right? So it was basically, if you look now back, it was a completely crazy idea, you have to say, right? To start a new university amidst Corona. But we strongly believed in this power. All the things have good sides and bad sides, right? And basically Corona was a turbocharger for digitalization in many ways.
Most definitely.
And we said from the beginning, we are designing curricula always with digital transformation in the back of our heads, and on the other side, so that all the students can be flexible as much as possible, meaning that we are streaming all the lectures for everybody who is not on campus yet because they are waiting for their visas, etc. But also for everybody who might want to review something out of the lectures. We have a lot of online content that we are also delivering, but we are also heavily focusing on an on-campus experience, which is, nowadays, especially after Corona, it's so important to talk with actual people and not just sit in front of your computer, I would say.
Okay, here's the first question that would take me probably down to the rabbit hole, or down
Already,
the rabbit hole.
Kenny.
Yeah, it didn't take long. One of the questions that I was basically debating, maybe Jeff will have something to add to that too, is basically how to weigh this. We're all going for digitalization, of course. And I find, though, that there is still a limit. There's a lot of possibilities, and it makes things much more convenient, much more flexible. But I still have a strong tendency to the face-to-face experience. And not only in this case, the face-to-face experience with a professor, but I find that sharing the same room with individuals and sometimes just catching on what they say, just as a really simple example, when you're listening to a lecture of the prof and he says something and you're like, what the hell is he talking about? And you turn around to your colleague and say, what did he say? And he says this and this. Okay. Then that takes a little bit of the fright of having to stop your professor in the middle of a conversation and going, excuse me, what did you just say? So how do you balance those two things? Where do you see, like you said, you started in Corona, so everything was digital, but you said you do you rely heavily, or you want to emphasize the personal experience. So how do you weigh those two?
They're difficult, right? For sure, because many students, we see this also, that many students I know not that they became lazy, but it's convenient, right? It's
Hmm.
convenient to join from home. We know this all of us when we went during Corona. We had a shirt down here and we had a jogging trousers down there. So it's convenient, but on the other side, I think we are emphasizing and we are putting a lot of effort into showing students what are the benefits of coming together and what are the
Hmm.
benefits on of events on campus and of meeting other people. For example, these networking events. Jeff, you also know that, right? The networking events. There were many event formats who you wanted to try digital. It does not work, right? Because people, this is just a clicking, and the small talk is missing,
Hmm.
right? And I have this discussion often with my students because they're hanging on their phones in the lecture, right? They are not attentive.
Hmm.
On the other side, every student also tells you that they are completely overwhelmed by digital media. Basically, it's too much,
Hmm.
um, and our brain is not designed for that. There are also studies that basically the rate of information that is dropping on us is increasing so quickly over the last decades in comparison how
Hmm.
quickly our brain is evolving, or how slowly basically, so that we cannot process so much information. So basically all the TikToks, Instagrams, LinkedIn's, etc. of the world are wonderful, but they are too much for our brain, and that's also the reason why I think they are always waves, right? And basically, okay, AI is super, and AI helps us also in this recording, etc. It's
Hmm.
wonderful, right? But basically, there's also the tendency of people that they want to go a little bit less digital and want to have also digital detox, want to also meet people, want to have a getaway without the phone at some point, right? Because I think the development in the last decades was just too much in some regards.
Jeff is already nodding in agreement.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, because it's interesting, like what you just described, or what you're doing at university is the same thing at GotPhoto we're also doing. Like we work on a hybrid model. We come in once or twice a week, and we actually are putting on events in the office to get people to come in more, because we want to always embrace that collaborative environment, similar to I think what university students are also looking for. So I think even for organizations, we're also trying to find that balance of like getting people to come in the office, but then it's okay still to work at home.
Okay. Okay. Well, on I guess the uptake of information is something what Elon Musk is working on with his little computer chip straight into the brain. So maybe that'll help us go completely digital. But I would basically underline the point, Peter, that you made, and Jeffrey, that you basically underlined also, is I guess things move also in waves. So where you see, this extreme movement towards digitalization, doing everything online, I'm sure that at some point, which you're basically also supporting, is, or both of you are supporting, is basically people coming back together and having these interpersonal interactions to learn and proceed. So the final question though that I don't think, because I interrupted you, we didn't get to, is what key skills do you believe are essential for students entering in today's market? Wow, that's a pretty big open question for a short
That's right.
podcast. Let me reduce it then. I'm going to make it a challenge for you, Peter. Can you name three things?
I don't. Naming three is maybe even more difficult, Kenny.
Yeah,
But
that's why I said I'm going to make it difficult. You have a
yes.
title,
So,
so
generally, to your question, I would go and say you need these T-skilled people, right? T-skilled workers, and T-skilled means that they have a foundation which is quite general in many different topics, right?
Mhm.
But then one specialization. And that, this is what also companies often are searching, because they are not searching only the specialists, right? Because the specialists don't have any knowledge about anything else, and also not about collaboration, why you need other departments, etc., right? But you need the people that are understanding the other departments as well, but in their specific area of expertise, they are really good and they are really deep and they are really specialized. Right? So I think these T-shaped specialists, T-shaped employees of the future, you need. On the other side, you need for sure a lot of resilience. I know that this is another buzzword. I'm sorry for that, Kenny, but basically, I love also the concept of resilience, because I think there are so many books about resilience, but basically it's all about learning by doing, right? Because you see people who are experienced, who are getting a lot of resilience, and you can only experience what stress is and how you need to adapt, right? When you are experiencing it yourself. There are many, there are many students who are saying, especially this new generation that is now coming into university at some point, or the guys who are just leaving school, who say, there's so much demand for me on the market, so I can make the rules. And here I think we have a problem at some point, right? Because then all of a sudden you're turning it around, and it's not so much that you like what you work, but you're just negotiating the best deal for you. And in that regard, I think it's a resilience. It's also being humble and being committed and courageous. Courageous in that regard that you're going where no man has gone before. I placed the Star Trek quote finally. But on the other side,
Wait a minute.
on the
Okay,
other side,
so you expanded from 3 to did you put that
to
under
4.
resilience? And then you added the Star Trek quote. I lost track. I was writing here for a second, but
So a resilience, right? Then courageous, committed, and humble. I would say these 4.
and to go where no man has gone before. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. The anecdote to that, though, depending on the audience that you have, you've now just basically outed a certain category because I've made jokes like that, and I look into the room and nobody has any idea what Star Trek was. So, Star Trek is maybe a little bit. I've made comments on movies, and it just ended up as a flat joke because nobody had any idea what I was talking about. But once again, Peter, you've nailed it. Especially for me in this when you mentioned, I'm not sure if this is a buzzword or something. I haven't personally heard of it, but I've talked about it often. Is your idea of a T-shaped? How do you describe T-shaped individual or
the T-shaped worker, T-shaped employee? I would say.
Okay, because that's basically what over my years in the workforce and so forth is something that I also basically always subscribed to, but never had a so on point description. Because at one point during my career path is always the generalist. Everybody needs the generalist. However, real life experience has taught me actually that you need to have a generalized experience, but there has to be something that you have to be damn good at, that you need to be the expert in. And that one thing you basically need to do well. And that's the best performers if you have a general feel for everything, but are specific in one area of knowledge. However, that being said, I think it's very hard. And Jeff, you might want to add something that general experience. I think that is hard for people to actually then also live and actually perform. I mean, the specialists are easy to get, but the people that are specialized with the general experience, those I think are harder. Would you agree to that, Jeff?
Yeah, I think, from a skill set perspective, I think it's always nice to have, like you said, Peter, the T-shape, which is great. I've actually heard that terminology before, so I'm going to take that away. But I think organizations do want that flexibility piece too, particularly like when you're thinking Berlin and that startup phase. You're kind of going in a jack of all. Like you have this specialization that you specialize in and have that expert knowledge, but there's times where the organizations need these people also to kind of step outside of that initial T-shape and actually having to take on other responsibilities. So I think having those different knowledges and your specialized field, but also the other areas of the business that are tying it all together and having some knowledge in those areas, I think is also important.
Okay.
Maybe if I can add one thing here, I think the generalization is sometimes needed, but it's hard for companies to grasp from my experience, right? So this has something to do that often people are thinking drawers, right? And Kenny, when you say, okay, you need something where you're really good at, this is also, I think, easier for HR departments, etc., to put you in a drawer and say, okay, here you're fitting. If you're going there and say, okay, I'm basically like you said, Jeff, jack of all trades, right? Then it's difficult for them to say, okay, you're fitting that job, but this one not. Right? So it makes the job much more difficult if you are adding a lot of complexity, because you are a complex person. You are interested in many different aspects of business.
Mm-hmm. However, I must say, just to add on that, I've been since I'm on LinkedIn, I get a whole bunch of job adverts and so forth, and I have seen though that the HR departments do have a change in that, as they say sometimes, this is a job description. If you don't fit, write us anyways. We'll see if there's anything that'll fit. So I think that's very good, and that brings us actually to the next topic of the challenges in bridging academia and industry. So what are some of the challenges, Peter, that Gisma faces when preparing students for their future careers?
I think maybe the biggest challenge is that the businesses and corporates and also startups, they always want more and faster than academia can develop and can provide, right? Which is also their job, right? But basically, we have to work closely with corporate partners together to understand the needs and also to develop our curricula further. And this is something that we are really trying to do, and also trying to find a good mixture between the practical application and theory on the other side, right? So that you are not only in practical terms really well equipped for your next career step, but also that you have a little bit of theory so that you can think outside of the box. And actually, this is, I think, something, this mix, this interesting balance that we have to keep is one of the most interesting aspects when you think about this University of Applied Sciences concept, because not like a public state university, like a classical university, we are only teaching theory, right? Okay, they are also teaching a little bit of applied science, by the way, but we are really focusing on theory and then directly practice. So everything that you learn with us, you put into practice in some way. This is one of our credos. And on the other side also, all the tutors that you find at Gisma and also at other universities of applied sciences, they have to have by law job experience. Right? This is also important. So you don't find any scientists who only worked in the laboratory.
Okay. So that basically alleviates part of my second question, which was basically how to ensure students are just not academically prepared, but also practically ready for a workforce. And you've already addressed that in the answer to that. So you've also, I think, briefly mentioned partnerships within this industry. So how do you work with companies or industries to shape the learning experience? How do internships, workshops, and collaborations contribute to this?
You have the tendency today, Kenny, to ask the questions which are so broad, right? So basically, we are working together in a whole bunch of different variants, right? So from speakers that are coming to campus, to excursions that we are facilitating, to hackathons. For example, now in the next Skill Sprint week in November, we are planning a hackathon together with Google in their headquarters, which is for sure for every data science student a wonderful thing, right? But we have also hackathons and company visits we did with Mercedes-Benz, with Vattenfall, right, with Zalando.
Okay. Well,
let
me interrupt you for a quick question. Okay. So the question I asked was rather expansive, but you did touch on a point that I think let's just focus on the unique experience, and that was the part where your partnerships, where you're actually going to various industry leaders. I remember during my studies, at least in the bachelor, we didn't do that. In the master's degree part of the program, we did though go to various industry leaders and experience their work on site. So what are some of the, and you mentioned hackathons. So what are some of the unique things that might not be the classics that we know of, like internships, like work partnerships or something? What are some of those unique things that you do?
I would say something that is really unique is the Skill Sprint Week that I mentioned before, because the Skill Sprint Week is really open for everybody, and is a offering where everybody from bachelor to master, right, can contribute and attend in, right? So this is a full week per quarter because we have 4 intakes. We don't have just 2, but we have 4 quarters per year, and so 4 intakes of students. So we are doing in every quarter, we do 1 week which is dedicated only to the skill development of students. And that means also that all the events are free for everybody, right? So if you would study now your bachelor with us and there's an excursion to Vattenfall and you are totally interested in that, then you just subscribe to the excursion, and then you come and you can network with the people there, right? But
Fantastic.
this is also, Kenny, it sounds wonderful, right? And also the students are happy, but on the other side, not everybody makes use out of that. That's also when I say, we are a university and we are not in kindergarten, so we can just offer you the different possibilities, but we are not spoon feeding you, right? So we're not running behind you and here's the job, please take it, right? We are not doing that. Also, some students, you believe it or not, they believe and they would also like that, and they would also basically expect that from us. But it's not happening
To hook
because
them up with a job right afterwards.
yes,
Okay.
and basically, but still, they have to write the motivation letter and they have to also do the job interview themselves, which is logical, right? At least for me. But for some students, not. And then I think so, this is also part of getting to not only an academic maturity, but it's also part of getting to a life maturity, that you understand that you have to take responsibility and that you are also, because later in your job, nobody is asking you to do your job, right? You have to do your job and you have to play in the team. So it's part of our job not to only enable people for critical thinking, but also prepare them to be successful in their job from a soft skill perspective, I would say.
Super.
It's interesting, Kenny,
go
just
ahead.
to jump in there, I wanted to share, I think what Gisma is doing is fantastic at getting these students out of the university and on site with the employers. And so many universities are now doing that and actually investing a lot of money in that. I'll give you a couple examples. When I was building out graduate programs for N26 and Zalando Summit, it got to the point, I remember at N26, we were getting so many universities coming to visit. It was getting to maybe 2-3 events a week. And it was
Wow.
beginning to be too much. And we were having universities come from Grenoble, from ISADE, universities from Spain. I remember UCL in London brought 80 students. 80 of their students flew over to Berlin and did a whole kind of trek around the big startups across Berlin. So, I mean, there's so much investment in getting students now, which is great for us as employers because we spend, a graduate recruitment team would spend so much time and money going out and traveling to all the universities during what we call the milk round. But now, and I've only seen it in Berlin, and now where universities are actually coming to us, it's actually allowing us to spend more time with the students, and we're able to engage with more universities, because if not, we have to be very selective on which universities we're going to go to. But the universities are coming to us. It's easier for the organizations to open those doors. Like, yeah, sure, why not? Come see us. It'll be fine.
Fantastic.
But then it allows us to do that talent spotting on campus. So when the universities bring the students, we're meeting them, we're interacting, we'll always have some sort of networking. And the organizations that do it right, like I did, you bring different hiring managers that come take part in these events, and they get a chance to talent spot with some of these potential students.
Amazing. It's fantastic to see, Peter, when I hear you talk about it, to see the journeys or the journey that, the education system has taken to adapt to the situations. And the thing that I had to kind of grin when you mentioned the expectations and what you're all offering. And my dad used to have a saying, and he's like, and it fits so perfectly. It's one of those old sayings. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I don't know, Jeff, maybe you've heard of it.
Absolutely.
And I think from what I'm hearing from you, I think those kids that go to your university, or hopefully other universities like yours, have such a wealth of items that are offered to them that they definitely need to take opportunity of, or at least scale down and sort out all the possibilities they have, because that's amazing.
And Kenny, it also really works quite well because
Mhm.
normally, when you come from abroad and you have a student visa, and you are studying at Gisma, for example,
Mhm.
then you get after that, after graduation, you get an 18 months job seeker visa,
Ah,
right? So you have
okay.
18 additional months to find a job in Germany or within Europe.
Mhm.
But our statistics and also our surveys show that 80% of the students
Mhm.
have already a job 6 months after graduation,
Lined up. Okay. Wow.
right?
Okay.
Um,
Those are some
there
pretty
was
good
also
figures.
one graduation where our keynote speaker just was asking, okay, because I think he wanted to recruit some of the students, to be honest, of the graduates. He asked, okay, who of you has already a job? And everybody was, there were maybe two people not having a job by that time
Oh, they didn't feel too
in the
good.
graduation. Yeah, so he was a little bit disappointed, but it was, it's great. Yeah, in that
Okay.
regard, it's great.
Okay. Um, okay, then let me ask one final. I'm going to ask two final questions to you, and the one is you've kind of answered it, but we're always trending to find out new things. I've learned already in this podcast a whole bunch of things that I can take with me. The one that's going to hit me the most is the T-shaped thing, but Jeff, you can tell me later what struck you the most. But uh, what with all the rapid changes in technology and so forth, how do you stay current and adapt new trends in the workforce? Now let me ask a different question. What would you say is a new trend um, that that you are looking at and that you might follow?
Second one is even more difficult than the first one. You have a tendency here as well, Kenny.
I'm
Okay,
just
so
I'm just ruining.
no, all good. So to answer the first part really quickly is I think there are two ways to stay up to date. First of all, a lot of events that we are attending as faculty and also as staff, and also a lot of communication with our partners. And the other stuff is also the other fact is also that many of faculty members have also, besides the academic pathway, they have still their own businesses, for example,
Mhm.
right? So not losing fully the touch with, I would have said now reality, but basically with uh, with the groundwork, with the corporate and practical experience.
Okay.
If you ask me about trends, to be honest, I think it's one of the biggest trends nowadays is humanism,
Okay,
right?
I need to write that one down. Humanism. Hit me.
Humanism, because I think that with all the technological advancements, everybody's then talking about renewable energy, sustainability, blah blah blah, and also AI for sure. But humanism is something that will definitely have a rise in the next couple of years, just because like I said before, it's just too much, and the personal touch will come back. And you see this also sometimes, even in HR, and Jeff knows this much better, but even in HR, you have this trend that everything should be standardized, everything should be automized, and everything should be as objective as possible. So blending out pictures, blending out basically even the interview should be done by chatbots in the best possible way, right? But we should not forget that we are still human beings, right? And if you work with somebody, Kenny,
Mhm.
right, you have directly, because we have an animal brain back there still. We have this animal brain, and within half a second, we know if we like somebody or not.
Mhm.
And this does not go away. And if I have now somebody who the machine recommends me to work in my team, but I just can't stand the guy, right?
Mhm.
Then this will be not a good teamwork, right? And this I cannot replace by an AI. So humanism, I think this is one of the big things besides all the technological advancements and fusion energy, etc., which is great because I think this will be another D&H once we have no worries about energy anymore. This might take another 10 to 15 years, but it's a multifaceted question, Kenny. It's a something for the beer in the evening, I think.
Well, you know what? I was going to actually ask another question, but I think you brought it somehow so to such a nice point in this conversation, and also again hitting it to the point with a key term, humanism, that I think I'm going to leave that, because I had a whole bunch of other questions about what to do best, but I think that will leave our listeners with the most input, is that we need to look at that aspect. So no matter what career advice, blah, 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 all, there's a whole bunch of advice you can give, but I think humanism hits it right on the money. So you hit that one out of the ballpark. So thanks, Peter, for being part of this conversation and leading us, giving us the first insight basically on the first step in your career, basically when you go through the university, and what possibilities, and what programs are offered, and so forth and so on. So let's take the second step, and that's going over to Jeff. And the second step is basically Jeff works as onboarding and talent acquisition, currently with GotPhoto. But you have a whole bunch of other relevant industry experience. So we're going to take that look and tell us, in general, what is your focus when you bring people in and onboard new talent? Wow, I'm asking so big open questions, but I'm hoping you can reduce that a little bit for me.
So when you say what's our focus on, explain the question again, because I don't know if that was...
Okay. Let me.
I was like, come on, Kenny.
Okay. Well, okay. So what do you focus on when onboarding new talent? What are you looking for in the individual? Like we just described, the T individual. Are you looking for a lot of job experience? Are you looking for somebody that's an expert, something like that?
So when you're saying onboarding talent, so you're talking, we've made that offer already and they're starting on their first day? Or are you talking about when we're recruiting and looking to onboard somebody into the organization?
Let's go with the recruiting aspect
two
first.
Separate things.
Well, see, that's why you're the expert. So we'll go with the first part, recruiting.
So we don't use, let's talk about recruiting, because onboarding is something completely different, right?
Okay.
So in the recruiting aspect, I think it just obviously depends on the job description. I think, yes, we have our standard of making sure that we are looking for the right specific talent, that have the right hard skills, the right soft skills that we look for the role, to ensure that they have a high predictability of success when we hire them. But there's also the other aspects of looking at, the cultural adds, and, are they a good cultural fit as well? And I think those are also important. And most people is the candidate aligning with us as an organization and believe in, our platform and what we're trying to do for photographers, for example, or if you're at another organization, are they aligning to what they do on an industry level? And I think that's also super important. I mean, I remember back when I interviewing students at Zalando, I'm like, oh, so, why is Zalando passionate about fashion? I'm like, okay, everyone has a little bit of passion for fashion, but why is it that you're looking and wanting to apply for this role? So I think, for us as organizations, it's as recruiters, it's about finding the right candidate that has the right skill set, going back to Peter, maybe the T-shape, but also those other elements of do they fit within the organization? Are they believing in our drive and path of the direction we want to take as an organization?
Okay. Do you find that out by asking generalized questions, or is it this is, I guess, since we're talking about the recruiting aspect. So what is I'm gonna have to ask you straight up, because this is just point of curiosity. What's the funniest question you've ever had, or the strangest response? Because you already alluded it, when people applied to Zalando, why do you want to work for this company? And I think the response was a passion for fashion, right? I don't know if somebody hit that off, but what I'm going to have to ask, sorry, that's off script now, but what is the funniest that you can remember?
The funniest response? There's probably one I probably shouldn't share.
Okay. Now I asked Peter a whole bunch of way open questions. Now, tip for you, don't lead into an answer saying there's something that I shouldn't share, because that's the first one that I want to hear. But we'll skip on that one.
That makes it even more interesting now.
No, because I just don't know if it's actually a response to a question, but I don't think it's actually appropriate to say on a podcast because it was that bad.
Oh, okay.
But I think
we learn more from mistakes than we do from doing everything right? So,
yeah. So, okay, well, actually, I could probably say because it relate because we're in Berlin.
Okay,
But
all
back in the
identities
day,
and so forth have been redacted to make the character neutral and has no
yeah.
real life persona. Okay, good. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, you can't tell. But I remember asking you a question around, we're asking a question around customer service, and can you give an example when you provided exceptional customer service? Uh, and the candidate actually proceeded to use an example about when he was working at an event, and it actually was a fetish event. And he started giving an example about how a participant was being inappropriate to another participant. Uh, and you could just kind of imagine the details there. But then I remember sitting back in my chair. First of all, I thought I was on a candid camera situation, looking around thinking, am I being recorded? Is this seriously the question the student is giving or the answer the student's giving me? Uh, and I actually had to take a step back. I'm like, you know, I don't know if that's the right answer or appropriate response to maybe give, but I'm going to give you another chance to maybe take a minute and think of another example that you could give that's going to really demonstrate going above and beyond when it comes to delivering customer service. Uh, and I think sometimes just, I don't know, students just sometimes maybe the brain's not ticking at all. Don't worry, Peter, it wasn't from your university, so you're good.
I would have
But
asked you after the session now.
no, you're in the clear. You're in the clear. But I mean, I think sometimes students don't necessarily prepare as much as they should have. And the universities do great at telling students how much and how important it is to prepare for these interviews, do your research, understand the organization you're applying for. And when I'm asking a simple question like, hey, so tell me what you know about our organization, when I worked at Enterprise Rent a Car, I could have been rich if I had a pound for every time a student said, oh, well, you work with cars. I'm like, okay, that's groundbreaking, fantastic. So it's just, I should write a book on these kind of responses, to be honest with you. But yeah, sometimes students are not necessarily as prepared as they probably should be going to universities. And I think part of that is because it's spam applying. And there's actually a big topic in the German early careers group we're talking about a lot is this new AI technology that's out there that's actually applying for you. So you set the ground rules of what you're looking for, and you could go to bed and you'll wake up and have applied to 600 different companies. And next thing you know, you randomly get an invite for an interview and you're like, wait, what's this company? You know nothing about the company. You haven't done the research to even see if this is even a role you want to apply for. And it's actually creating so much additional work for recruiters now in the industry, particularly in that early career space. I actually just had a conversation with my boss at GotPhoto, Elisa, yesterday, because we're hiring for a people operations team lead role. And it's an HR role. And because that word operations is in the job title, we're getting candidates apply that come from an operations background or from like a warehouse background because they're using this AI tool.
Wow. Okay. So that you've led up to my next question, which was actually going to be, what are some of the challenges? Actually had phrased the question for onboarding, but that's the step after recruiting.
Yeah.
So in the recruiting process, though, I guess you're now being overwhelmed with AI questions and so forth. What else is a challenge in the recruiting phase?
Well, I think there's a couple different challenges because I think like case studies, a lot of organizations are utilizing case studies now to see, how the candidate thinks, how they would potentially do a role or perform at a role. And there's actually, when submitting case studies, like I was looking at some the other day, and AI is being used to solve case studies. When I was hiring for for technical roles, and we're sending out coding challenges, there's a huge debate of whether this person has used any chat GPT or AI to solve some of these coding challenges. And so I think one of the challenges is on paper and through the interview process, they seem to have done a good job. But then when we actually get them in the business, it turns out maybe they're not the right hire because that candidate has probably got through a process completely using AI.
Okay.
So I think it's hard for organizations now to see how to best recruit, particularly like if you're in tech, and you send out a coding challenge, it's so important to also make sure you do a live coding session just to ensure that there's no cheating being done.
Okay, just once again, personal question, interjection here. Do you still, is it still industry standard to use like assessment centers? Back in the day, I applied to a tech company. I went through an assessment center, which I thought was a really unique experience. And the pinnacle of the experience was actually, um, I did an error that you mentioned in a form that I didn't read the room. The tech company I applied to had like a rather leisure setup, and I showed up in a suit. So I was point number one against me. And then the second part, which I thought was really unique, which I hadn't experienced at all, is that I was in a quasi assessment center setup with my competitor. So with another individual that was also applying for the job. And that was a rather interesting thing. So do you use assessment centers to help alleviate some of the problems that you said?
For experience hiring, no. But for younger talent, for that junior talent coming in, I've seen assessment centers being used. Now, in Germany, I haven't seen a whole lot of assessment centers. And I don't know, Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, but
Not a
in
lot.
the UK, when you look at the graduate market in the UK, I think it's so much further ahead than what it is here in Germany. And yes, there was assessment centers. So back in the day when I was at Enterprise Rent-A-Car FDM Group, at FDM Group, I was running all of our locations. We probably had like 4 or 5 different assessment centers going on per week. The office in London, we probably were turning about 100 students a week through an assessment center. So those are really big because that's where the market's gone to. But I think even now with post-COVID and this work remote, that a lot of organizations are kind of looking at how to do these assessment centers, particularly online. But I know there's lots of organizations that will bring hundreds of students in for one big, massive assessment centers. But in Germany, not so much. It's not a big thing here.
Is there generally advantage or disadvantage, would you say, from your experience?
I think I always liked assessment centers because you can really get a good grasp, not just of how they perform in the assessment center, but it's the in-betweens and getting a chance to meet the candidate, having those conversations with students in between the different breaks or different sessions. I really enjoyed that because I got a better grasp of whether this candidate A is going to be a great fit for the organization. But then also seeing them live and how they interact in group settings is a good advantage. But I think us as organizations, we need to evolve. Companies are moving to these hybrid working models. A lot of people are now moving online. I think we have to also look at how we recruit these graduates in that way as well.
Okay. So let's move then from the recruiting part to the onboarding part. So you've selected individual XYZ and you bring them on board. How obviously there's going to be some skill gaps, right? You don't hire,
Right.
and most of the individuals won't be the perfect ideal fit. So how do you address any skill gaps that exist between what the new hire has learned in the university and the specific needs of company XYZ?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kenny. I've actually done a lot of that. So I think there's a couple steps to leading up to then implementing or looking into that. One is always doing retrospects with your hiring managers. So when it comes to the graduate market, there's always the big intake during the summer, or there's a short intake during the winter as well. But after each intake, it's about having those conversations with the hiring managers like, hey, how was this year's graduate pool that came in? How well are they performing? Are there any gaps that you're noticing? And they'll tell you, yes, X, Y, and Z, and we're having to do a lot of additional training. So what that allows you to do is start getting information about how do we build these development plans for these graduates coming into the organization, but then also utilize that information and going back to like Gisma University and saying, hey, we're seeing some skills gap here. Let's run some sessions around emotional intelligence or collaborative working environments, or and actually us as an organization going on campus or running these different workshops that actually help develop those skills. So I think it's always a good partnership with the universities to be very open and transparent with them and letting them know, hey, we're seeing some skills gaps here, whether we come on campus and support you with that, or they start embedding that into their curriculums. But then once you have that information, I think still the organization has obligation to help onboard that student to accelerate them as quick as possible. And how do you build those little acceleration programs? And I worked with Rebecca Fielding from Grad Consult a lot, particularly when I was at SumUp, of that whole transition from university to work. So what were the skills gap? Effective communication. This isn't the student world anymore. You really have to think about how you're communicating with the higher ups or with collaborating with the organization. That emotional intelligence piece, self-awareness, timekeeping. University is quite flexible. You have your time schedule out, for the whole year, but when you come in, it's like, how do you manage your time better? And I think those are a lot of different things that students struggle with in that transitioning. And I think if the organization builds out these accelerated programs in the right way, they could get the students quickly up to speed to where they actually start really performing within their roles for the organization.
Okay. You mentioned something that I'd like to dive deeper into again. And that's something that we've talked about roughly, we've touched on it, but both you and Peter have worked together on, cooperative efforts. How does that come about? Do you think there's a higher need either for universities to reach out to companies to ensure there's more exchange, or should companies be the driver in, looking for, okay, we have needs. Should we approach a university and look for active partnership? How much of that is there in the industry actually?
Yeah, I think it depends on the organization. Like
Mm-hmm.
for me, when I'm building out these grad programs and working with universities, I always look at it as a two-way relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I think sharing back to the universities what this year's intake was, and then working with them to say like, hey, what are some of the skills gaps that you're working on? Is that aligning? Actually, why don't we look at incorporating some of this instead? I remember I'll tell you a story. As you tell, I'm like a storyteller. I like to tell stories, but when I first got into graduate recruitment at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, I sent an email, and I was new, I was fresh, I was coming with ideas, and I looked at data, and I think all the organizations are really data driven now, but I looked at this particular university, and the previous year we had hired like 20 something, and we were already 3/4 to the year, we hired like 4. And there were so many candidates getting rejected at different stages. I was like, something's not happening. Something's not working here. And so I sent an email. In the job title, it said, your students are not employable. And then I explained in the email why that was. And I showed them all the data of like, hey, you've had like 300 students apply, but they're all getting knocked out at first interview. And those that do make it past the first interview are getting knocked out at the assessment center. My phone never rang so quick by the head of careers, literally within minutes. And that email got to the dean. It kind of blew up. But what was great is that they were so responsive, like, oh my God, if this is happening with you, thank you for sharing this data. Is it happening with the other employers? So I actually came on campus and we literally built out an entire program like, hey, we got the last semester here. Let's knock this out. Let's do X, Y, and Z on campus. Let's run this workshop. Let's run that workshop. And literally within that kind of last semester, we hired over 30 students. Just by doing these little bit of workshops to help the university that training and development. So if it wasn't for me as an organization sharing data back to the universities that shows them how their students are performing in recruitment processes, we would have never known we had an issue, or this university would have never known they had an issue.
Okay, I see Peter's already agreeing and nodding. So I think this strikes pretty much a pretty big chord for you, right? In the sense that, I mean, what Jeff described, I think, is very forward-thinking, very novel to my hearing. How do you experience it as a university? Is what Jeff said, is that an exception, or do you see more and more businesses reaching out in that fashion?
I would love to see more and more businesses reaching out, to be honest, right? But at the moment, it's more still like this, at least in Germany, and I think in Western Europe, like this, that it's mostly driven by universities and by individuals, right? So that universities, they get the pressure from the students and they have to do something, right? On the other side, out of a business perspective, I think it's just a missed opportunity, because businesses could easily, we did, for example, for years, a really close partnership with PricewaterhouseCoopers, where they saw this as a recruitment channel as well, right? And it's just a missed opportunity if you don't invest a few hours every quarter or every half a year into a partnership where you get also something back. On the other side, the university also needs it because the university wants to have some programs which are attractive and which are near to the market and what the market needs, right? But I think generally, Kenny, that the initial impulse is most often coming from the university.
Okay. So, to all our listeners out there, then that should be a call to arms for all L&D people.
Definitely.
That they should get their companies more involved into universities, and not only involved in the sense that they have a couple questions, or set up a recruitment stand on the recruitment day of the university, but actual with factual information. Because I guess that helps you then, Jeff, during your onboarding practice time, basically that skill gap that you constantly have to address, which inadvertently you do. But with a program like that in place, you can be assured that it's smaller, right?
It's smaller, but it's also always evolving, right? So if you're always after each intake, you're going back to your hiring managers. Great. How was the intake this year? We're seeing X, Y, and Z. Great. And so we're always going to keep evolving versus keep hiring people that keep having the same skills gap. Because the business changes, right? So what was a gap now could not be the gap in a year's time.
Okay.
So I think it just helps the organizations keep current.
Okay.
And maybe,
yeah.
I think, sorry to interrupt, right? But I think Jeff is really here, the prototype, right? If you want to say it, it's really perfect, right? And I really loved it. I think that many organizations and many businesses think, okay, I work together with a university, and this is highly inflexible and old-fashioned, etc. I want to just say, there are many different ways of collaboration. And I think many universities are just happy to get in touch with businesses, because it makes also the whole sessions, the lectures, the modules, the whole university life much more, lively and much more practical and tangible.
Well, for me, I think it's fascinating to see once again the possibilities out there. And Jeff, I like the way you address it. Maybe it's the American thing, that we're sometimes a little bit more practical than the Germans. That you just get into.
I've been in Europe for like 15 years. I'm half European at this point.
Okay, so
but I do
where I'm coming from.
Yeah, but like I do, because I just feel like it's the right thing to do. I was like, for me, if I'm responsible for bringing in the next wave of junior talent into an organization, I want to go out and find the very best talent for my organization. So I'm going to do whatever it takes to engage with the universities in the right way to find the very, very best talent. And to do that early on, because I want to get in there before all the other organizations get in there as well.
Okay. Wow. I think we've blown the doors off this conversation, because originally I had a really nice plan, but I think it went a little bit off topic. But I think overall, for those people listening, I think we addressed a lot of really good topics. A lot of good information has come across. Both Peter, from how the students are at the university and what you can do, and Jeff, I love your insights, and I think you would be the perfect. Can one say poster boy? No, but you'd be the perfect. I think you're the perfect individual, or the perfect. How should I say it? Advocate of such an integration between onboarding, or basically a company that's recruiting, HR department, whatever, and the interaction between a university. I think you mapped it out beautifully, and I already see that a lot of things that Peter and his organization has done already start independently coming together on that point. So I think it's a fantastic cooperation that should be possible, and that companies and universities both should look for. So in the closing, Peter, do you have anything that you would like to, in closing, maybe share with our audiences, or basically, let's say, young listeners and graduates? What would you recommend to them? And for individuals like Jeff, learning and development individuals, HR individuals that are looking to employ, what would be your 2 words or final words to each one of these 2 groups?
Kenny, big, right? No, basically, what I would say, we are often talking about skill shortage, right? Especially in Germany, especially in Western Europe. And on the other side, there are so many technologies opening horizons of possibilities for lifelong learning. I'm a big fan of lifelong learning, right? So this on the one hand side, right? But I think for many students, for many guys who are coming from schools, for many graduates, this creates the wrong image of everything is possible without commitment, right? Because no matter what I do, I will be successful. Because if nothing else is happening, I'm becoming a let's player, YouTuber, or influencer, right? So and from that mindset, I would like to just have maybe now at the end the wish for a little bit of self-reflection, right? Because when you look at your parents and the parents of your parents, right, totally different generations, I get this, but whatever is a pinnacle of success is on the one hand side self-discipline and commitment, right? Being reliable and managing expectations, and on the other side empathy and the wonderful soft skills of listening and also active participation in a dialogue. And I think these are skills that are much, much underrated because they will help you a long way, no matter what you do. No matter if you are going to GotPhoto or you go to N26 or you go to PricewaterhouseCoopers, right? Or you go and become an entrepreneur, right? Or a podcast host, right? Or you become an influencer in the end, right? But these are fundamental human values that I think at the moment, because of AI, because of us not having enough communication, they are just totally underrated and they are getting under the wheels at the moment. So maybe we should think a little bit more about
Fantastic closing statement. Like it. I
that.
really, Peter, you're a joy to talk to, and it's been fun. If I have to ever go to the university again, I'll come check out some of your courses. Although,
Please do, Kenny. Always welcome.
Also, I am not that.
No, thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. So, and Jeff, now your closing words. I would direct your closing words and also to the students. So maybe some input on how they can, better prepare. And maybe you've already pretty much said it, but once again to a caption, what would you wish for that more HR departments do?
Yeah. So I think for the HR professionals watching this podcast, I think right now it's a good time to do this because we're approaching the end of the year. You're going to start looking at your forecast for hiring this year or for next year. And I'd probably just really take a step back and think, how do I want my organization to look? Do I want it to continue to be a pear shape, which means we're just really fat in the middle with a lot of senior or experienced talent, or do we want more of a pyramid shape? And think about what percentage of the organization should we have dedicated to junior talent and actually budget that? Because bringing in younger talent into your organization is keeping you more current because the newer generation coming in has different ways of doing things, different way of thinking, but also provides more longevity within the organization because there's a lot of studies out there that shows that a graduate will stay with their first organization for 3 to 4 years because they're appreciative of that first opportunity they've been given and they become very loyal to that organization. So if your organization that's struggling with retention, there's other reasons for that retention, but also bringing in more of a younger junior talent will also help with that retention in your organization. I think for the students watching, I think familiarity with data analytics. So many organizations are so data driven now, and having some background and knowledge of data, machine learning, AI tools, I think could be very useful. Even if you're want to go into HR and you're getting a degree in psychology, you're going to need to understand data because we're pulling out retention numbers, we're pulling out forecasting and hiring numbers. And, there's so many things that we're looking at from a data perspective, even in the HR function, that you need to have that kind of understanding. But I think when you look at your soft skills, and something I think I stress to students is that emotional intelligence is super important. Cross-functional collaboration. We're all in this hybrid working environment now. So can you show the organization that you can manage projects virtually from end to end, that you can work more independently on your own and not having somebody sitting next to you at a desk in an office. So I think those type of skills that you can develop will be super beneficial when entering into the job market.
Bam. Okay. For both of you, that I would say is in a mic drop. I truly appreciate your guys' time and the information you imparted here. Fantastic. And I would have loved to get into more and deeper discussions with you. So maybe I'll have to call you up for another interview so we can ask more broad questions. But you guys just had such great responses. I highly appreciate that. I hope that, and I believe that basically our listeners will also appreciate and enjoy it. So thank you very much. And for all of you listening, if you like the podcast, then hit the like button, or even better, subscribe. And that's it. And see you next time on The Learning Curve with me, Kenny. And thanks again, Jeff and Peter, for being part of this super little podcast here. Thanks.
Thank you,
Bye.
Kenny.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
This podcast is released once a month and presented to you by IMC Learning. If you liked the episode, we would be happy if you subscribe to our podcast and recommend it to your friends and colleagues.